Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.
Welcome to all.
History is made of stories.
In this episode, we will be sharing good reasons to foster diversity.
For some people, the advantages of diversity are obvious. There's no longer any need to explain them. But for others, diversity is no more than another legal obligation with which to comply.
To foster diversity, we need to understand why today's companies should embrace it. So, beyond legal obligations, diversity, what's the story?
Diversity is imposed by law. And often the first argument for diversity and for combating discrimination is that it's a legal obligation.
But the very first argument in favor of diversity, the one that should be obvious, is moral, except that the morality argument implies that there is good and evil, or acceptable and unacceptable, in terms of company behavior. And that brings us to the question of universal morality. And, as it turns out, morality is subjective.
We're not here to debate the existence of universal morality. We're simply trying to explain that arguing that promoting diversity is a moral issue isn't enough to make diversity a reality.
That's why legal obligations were added to moral imperatives. The problem is that the law varies from country to country, which means some are more advanced than others when it comes to certain aspects of diversity, though not necessarily all.
Sometimes practices that are mandatory in one country can in fact be strictly prohibited in another, in particular when it comes to diversity statistics.
What's more, even when you combine the moral imperative with legal obligations, it's still not enough to successfully achieve what amounts to a profound cultural transformation.
So, we need to add a third argument, which should speak to companies, their shareholders, and the people who run them: performance.
But we must be careful. It's dangerous to affirm that diversity leads to company performance. There is no consensus regarding a direct tie between diversity and performance. And the reason for that is simple: it is difficult to study two such vast concepts and causal links between them in a comprehensive way.
Many studies have suggested, however, that one particular aspect of diversity contributed to a particular aspect of performance. So, we can cite several arguments in favor of diversity to optimize certain aspects of performance.
For example, a diverse workforce promotes better adaptation to an increasingly diverse clientele, according to a BCG study.
There's also the fact that diversity, as a source of different backgrounds, can be a source of innovation and creativity, which are crucial for a company looking to achieve long-term success.
We could also mention a company's appeal as an employer to manage the lack of candidates in certain sectors. Opening up to different profiles is a sure way to attract the best talent.
And there's also the question of developing employee loyalty. Because by promoting diversity, you also promote the values of respect and equity, which are key to engagement.
So, diversity can be thought of as a potential and conditional contributing factor for performance. In other words, it's important to foster diversity to be an attractive employer and a creative company, which in the end results in better performance. But it's not enough on its own.
No, you also have to promote all kinds of diversity, not just one category. And you have to make sure that representatives of these diverse backgrounds mingle and share ideas. While it's important to multiply differences at companies, it's even more important to manage them in a way that promotes mixing to create a kind of melting pot.
To recap, the first argument for diversity is a moral imperative, and the second is a legal obligation. But these two arguments aren't enough. We call on a third, company performance, because diversity is one of the many prerequisites for success. Is that right?
Exactly right. Way to make a long story short. Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.